Hello, I'm Rachel from Douentza Garden in Ireland, and I have a very sorry video for you today. Sorry because of what has happened to my very, very old Christmas cactus. So this is a plant that was my mother's originally, so you know how these things go if it's been around for that long and has flowered regularly so beautifully, then it is something that you cherish and want to hold on to. Well, oh dear, this is a plant that thrived on neglect for so many years. It never seemed to need much water at all. But then there was a new waterer in the family, let's just say. And as I passed by this plant where it lives on the landing, I noticed that, well, this branch just kind of was lying on the ground, had fallen off, and the rest of the plant is looking fairly sorry. And upon closer inspection, it seems that the plant is rotting from the base. So today we're going to save this cactus because, well, you know, I don't want to lose it. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Okay, so this is my Christmas cactus, Slumbergera, and I'm going to decide what to do with it now based on how far the damage has gone. And, you know, this is something that happens to many of us. These plants really need well-drained soil and they need to dry out completely between waterings. So if you don't do that, then there's danger of rot. And if we look closely, you can see that yes, there is rot, and this branch that fell off and the one that I saw lying on the ground, well, it's actually rotted, not just the roots, but way up the stem. And because this is an older Christmas cactus, it's got quite woody stems leading on to the top growth. Now, the plant itself looks a little bit dehydrated, and, you know, it's not that in itself isn't something that I would normally be worried about, because these plants in winter, especially when you water them less, they can seem quite dehydrated. More like are quite dehydrated. But one thing to bear in mind is that dehydration can be a symptom of two completely different things. So dehydration can be as a result of the plant not getting enough water, and that can be because somebody hasn't watered it enough. But dehydration can alternatively be the result of the plant not getting enough water because somebody watered it too much. And if you water the plant too much, then it rots the roots. And if the plant has no roots, then no matter how much water you give it, it just can't absorb that water. So it is going to look limp and lifeless. If we look closely at this plant, you can see that we do have some branches that have just come straight off, completely rotted up until about this point here. That one. We also have this other one that came off when I went and examined further, also rotted to about here. Big branches, because this was a substantial plant. And now let's have a look at the inside. And this is where one branch rotted away, and if I put my finger in there, it's definitely squidgy, and the other one came off there. And just a touch of the soil indicates that yes, this is a plant that has been overwatered. It was given too much water. Now, unfortunately, with older plants like this, if they haven't been repotted in a while, then the soil gets very compact. And the result of that is that it can be difficult to tell whether the soil is dry or not, because it just feels hard. And we tend to associate friable soil with moisture, whereas this soil is never going to feel like that. So it will always seem dry to the untrained finger, and that's what's happened here. Now, I'm just wondering if the root ball can be saved at all, and I don't think so. This piece here just wants to break off, and the rot isn't just here, the rot extends up where it's quite squidgy. So I'm just going to take this off and see what the rest of the extent is. Oh my goodness, this is not good. So this piece behind is also rotted away. This one here is also rotted away. Yeah. Bad smell, bad situation. And over here, this piece is not rotted, strangely. So it is firm. So I wonder, might I try and save this piece? So pulling back a little bit more, you can see that the leaves on this section of the cactus are actually in very good shape. And that's because they're still getting water, because they still have roots. So I guess all in all, about a quarter of the plant is still intact and 3/4 have rotted off. I suppose I'm quite lucky really that I do have a portion of the plant that is still healthy, although whereas you might think that it may be more difficult to save this section than it will be to propagate from this. Now, in a situation like this where a plant is dying, or in the case of a cactus, probably rotting, then what you need to do as a backup is to propagate the plant. Now, this looks quite droopy, but you can actually propagate from droopy leaves like this. Once the roots establish and the plant starts getting hydrated, then it should come back. And in here among the material, there are bits that are more hydrated than others. So the first thing I'm going to do is to take some cutting material from this array of rotting greenery that I have in front of me. And as you'll recall, the rotting bit is down here at the stem, and I'm going to take propagation material from near the top. So why wouldn't I propagate the whole arm? And the answer to that is really twofold, I suppose. So if you have a very large cutting with no roots, then what may happen is that the weight of the cutting that you put into the soil, the top part of the cutting will be so heavy that it will make any newly establishing new roots in the soil move, because it will be top heavy and will be falling over the whole time, and that will stop those roots establishing, because they'll no sooner have gotten a grip when they'll be rooted up and pulled up again. So you don't want your cutting to be too long, and also the bigger the portion of plant that you try and root, the more work those roots have to do. So for example, if I take a cutting that is just this size and I establish roots, well, those roots will start to feed the leaves quickly. Whereas if I tried to root this whole thing, then those tiny roots are going to have to get a whole lot bigger before they'll make any impact on saving the whole body of the plant. So it is best to propagate with smaller pieces. Now, if we look closely at these leaves, you may notice that some of them already have roots forming in the axils, and some Christmas cactuses do that. They have a propensity to make kind of aerial roots, and this will be a great gift for anybody trying to propagate the plant. And of course, if you propagate a plant vegetatively, which is what I'm suggesting to do here with this Christmas cactus, then you end up with a plant that's identical in genetic makeup and every other trait to the parent plant. Now, I did mention that this process is a 4-stage process. I suppose a 4-stage process, 4.5, 4 3/4, who knows. We're just doing the first stage today, and that is to take the cuttings, because when you take cuttings, they need to callus over before you plant them. Otherwise, the moisture of the soil will just go into the cutting and you'll be back to square one again, rotting your cutting off. So with the clean, dry secateurs, I'm going to take some cutting material. And do you know what? I could actually take cutting material from this healthy portion of the plant, which I'll try and save in a minute. This would be a really good candidate. So it does seem a shame to cut up this plant that has actually survived. So I will look here for the best pieces of this. And I suppose you want your cuttings to be about so long in length. So just snip here, put it down. Now you can root dehydrated leaves. However, I don't need to in this instance, but we'll do one or two just to see how it turns out. And here's a decent piece, which I'll just cut down here. I'm making sure to catch the bits that are less dehydrated because they just have a longer life in them and they can wait longer for those roots to form than the ones that are really on their last legs and dying of thirst. I've laid my cutting material out here in the greenhouse where it's dry, and I'm going to leave it for 3 days until they callus over properly. You can leave it 3 to 7 days, but I do want to get roots started on these plants as soon as possible because the leaves are quite dehydrated in some cases. Now these I'm going to propagate by water culture and also the conventional method using soil. And now I'm going to have a go at saving this plant, and what I need to do is get rid of a lot of this soil, this kind of really wet, overwatered soil. I should probably have brought a knife, no need. Just came straight out, I guess, because the edges of the root ball were so very wet. So what I'm really going to do here is just to knock off as much soil as I possibly can. And a lot of these roots will just be rotted, just be dead. And I'm going to repot what's left after I take off a whole load of soil and put it in a well-drained mix and hope for the best. Because it would be nice to have a larger plant. The thing about my mother's plant was that it was a very large Xmas cactus, gorgeous orange colour, and I always looked forward to it coming into bloom. Well, at some stage in winter. I can't say it ever flowered at Christmas, but that's always the way with these plants. Now, I'm going to err on the side of caution here, taking off too much soil rather than too little. So what I don't want to do is to leave nasty, wet soil around the root ball of this plant, whatever's left of those roots. And roots can grow back, but rotting is irreversible. So just take off all the soil. I wonder which of you has the oldest Xmas cactus. Do let me know down below how old yours is if you have a particularly old one. And this is a very brutal repotting. I wouldn't normally do this with a Xmas cactus. Normally I'd disturb the roots as little as possible because they're very delicate roots, and just put it into I guess a pot that's a little bit bigger. But in this particular instance, given the overwatering, I want to make sure I have all of the rotting roots removed. See? That's not good. And just feeling in there with my fingers, making sure that there's no sludginess going on. Sludgy. Not a good thing, not a good feel, not a good smell, and not very good for plant health. I think, let's bring that in close so you can see. I think that's what we're left with. So you can see that there are still some roots attached, and hopefully they're live roots. They don't seem rotty. Just rotating the plant a bit. And now I'm going to make up like a very well-draining mix and get this baby potted up. My mix is 1 part potting compost and 2 parts horticultural sand mixed together very well. And I'm going to put the plant in this clay pot. Well, actually, I'm going to use a smaller clay pot than I originally showed you. and that's because it matches the root ball. So the worst thing I could do really is to overpot this plant, and that's really what you want in terms of pot size. So just putting a little bit of the sandy mix in at the base, manoeuvring the root ball in here. I can take the opportunity to make a more upright plant, because this was kind of like a side branch, but now we've got, well, you know, I can stand it upright. And I'm just going to put some mix around the root ball. Not burying it deeper than it was already buried. That would be a mistake too. And just firm it in. Okay, so there we go. Just put that down there, and there is my potted plant, and fingers crossed that it will do well. Now, I'm not going to water this. As with all succulents, I'm not going to water for a week after potting, and especially in this case because, oh, we don't want the rotting. So there he is. I think I will just leave it here. No, we have a window above and we might have some rain. I'll put it somewhere where it's going to stay really dry and not water for a week. And then in a week I'll resume watering, but be careful not to overwater. Okay, so that's the first section of this video. Do come back in 3 days and we'll have a look at what to do with the cuttings. So now I'm going to pot up my cuttings. They're well calloused over. It's like 4 days since I last did it. And I'm going to pot them up in 2 ways. And the first is the more conventional way, using a potting mix that is largely sand, like you saw me use for potting up the piece of the cactus that still had roots. I'm also going to pot up some of these using water, so the water method. And the reason for that is that some of these cuttings are very dehydrated. Now, you can get results with dehydrated cuttings, but they do require more water quickly in order to survive. So the longer they struggle to make roots to get the water, the worse it is for them. So I'm going to try water culture for those cuttings. So first things first, the part of the plant that was closest to the top of the pot, i.e. the bottom of the cutting, needs to go into the soil. If you plant it upside down, you will not have success. I'm just using a knife to make the hole so that I don't damage the cutting when I put it into the mix. I'm now going to water my cuttings lightly. That's probably enough. And the same thing with the remaining cuttings. We need to make sure that the downside is down, and I'm placing them in a glass with a little bit of water at the base. And not too much, just a little bit. And it's probably best not to have your cuttings touching, because if one decides it's going to rot and it's touching another, then it's going to bring the other one down with it. And now I'm going to bring these into the house and leave them at room temperature in indirect light. And here I am back again 10 weeks after the clips that you just saw, where I propagated my Christmas cactus in 2 ways and repotted the surviving piece from the big rotting fiasco. And I just wanted to give you an update of how they did, so that you will know yourself, if you're encountering such a situation, what the best way to proceed is. And I guess the first thing to show you really is the portion of the plant that I potted up, and it really is doing quite well. Now, it still is a little bit droopy, or it is a little bit droopy. We have had some attrition with the segments at the very tips of the branches kind of I don't know, kind of limping off and dying off, but that's okay. I'll just remove them. I think this plant is doing well and should be okay, but it will take a little bit of a while before it is, well, I don't know if it'll flower this year or not, but I can tell you that the cuttings certainly might. And now let's take a little look at the 2 sets of cuttings I made. As you will recall, I put 3 leaf cuttings in each pot. And this pot here has the ones that I submitted to waterculture. You remember the whole story. And here are the ones that have been potted up correctly. And I suppose if we have a look straight away at the waterculture ones, then we might get an idea of what's going on. And one thing that is for sure, the waterculture method does work. Pretty much straight away after I popped these little babies into the water, they started producing roots. And you can see that we have 2 healthy sets of roots. I'm trying to untangle them without doing damage. Very healthy looking roots there, and these can now be potted up. So I'll just put these over here. You'll recall that I put 3 here in the water, and here's the 3rd one. But as for the 3rd leaf that I popped into the water, well, that has been less than successful, and you can see that it has produced no roots and the tip is beginning to rot. There's even a little bit of mold there. And now let's move over here and have a look at these 3 cuttings. Very interestingly, some of these have tried to flower, and if we look closely you can see the buds of flowers already beginning to form. See? And there was a bigger bud that formed on one of these 3 a little while ago, and I just removed it. And in fact, that's what I'll do with these. I'll just nip them out. Whether this is a good sign or not, I am not sure. It may be a bad sign, because we all know the story of the swan song. The swan sings its most beautiful song when it knows it's dying. And plants can do that too. They can make a last ditch effort to survive, to produce seed when they know that they're dying. Now I'm very interested to see how these have done compared to the waterculture ones, because I'm a big advocate of this kind of propagation method as opposed to waterculture. I just find waterculture all a bit of a fiddle, and I think that the roots on watercultured propagation material take a little longer to acclimatize than ones that are done properly, like I have done here. But let's see what's gone on. Well, at first glance, it's not easy to see what's going on, because I don't know if there are any roots here at the base of these cuttings. But what I'll do is I'll just pop them into the water I have, just clean them off, and we'll see if there are any roots. Well, this one, first up, no roots, and it seems to be rotting. This one is looking quite healthy, quite plump. Let's just kind of clean it off, see what's going on. Now, normally, if I were doing this not for the camera, I would have left this pot much longer before checking to see what's happening. But I do feel that the cuttings in waterculture need to be potted on now, so it makes sense to compare them to how these ones have done. And yeah, these are beginning to grow roots. This one is growing roots. Quite different roots from the ones produced by the waterculture propagation, but roots nevertheless. And let us also take a look at this one, which seems quite healthy and plump, but has less down below. Okay, right, we do have roots here as well. So there you go. And I guess I will pot this up now. Interestingly, the side of the leaf seems to have a bit of rot in it just there. So I'm just going to tidy up, clean off the rotting bit on this cutting. And I have a very sharp knife here, which I'll use to just trim. And now let's put it in one of these teeny tiny little pots. And as I mentioned before, it would have been better to leave these cuttings undisturbed until you see roots coming out at the base of the pot, rather than repotting them now when they're just barely getting going with roots. But as I said, I wanted to compare the two. Okay, so put that in here. And I hope it will forgive me for the premature disturbance. And now let's have a go at the waterculture cuttings. So here we are. These two are the waterculture propagations, and these two are the potting mix propagations. And you'll see that by accident the potting mix propagations are just that little bit longer than the waterculture ones. But I think what's interesting here is that out of 3 cuttings done each way, in each case 2 have survived. So what do we learn from this? Well, obviously the life of my mother's Christmas cactus will continue, because I have the main plant, or a portion thereof, which is doing well and should go on to recover in time. And I also have, well, 4 cuttings, 2 done via waterculture and 2 done via a more traditional method, which involves putting the cutting material into a potting mix. Now, which one will you use if you encounter this same kind of problem, or if indeed you just want to propagate your Christmas cactus? And I guess it's down to how you do things and your style of gardening. Now for me, I prefer to just pot things up in soil in the potting mix and just leave them for a longer time, and I know that they will get established and do well longer term. However, if you're the kind of person who wants quick results and wants to see those roots forming, then I guess waterculture is the way to go for you. It's certainly the quicker method. Just, you do have to keep a bit of an eye on them when you transfer them to the potting mix. Now all of these cuttings and the parent plant will come back indoors with me. I've just brought them out here to the greenhouse to show you, and I will ensure that they stay watered. For the waterculture ones, well, normally with Christmas cactus you'll allow to dry out completely between waterings, but for the ones that have been submerged in water for quite a period of time, I think I will keep them just that little bit more moist and see how it goes. I hope you found this video useful. I hope your Christmas cactus is healthy and not rotting, but if you do fancy taking some cuttings or to try various experiments, then perhaps you'll find this video useful. Thank you as always for watching, and I will see you on the next video. Bye!